Well, it's a pleasure now to invite and welcome our third speaker on the upcoming panel this morning, Mr. Bob Patel, the CEO of LyondellBasell and President of the ICCA, to deliver the keynote address.
All right, well, thank you very much for your introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I would like to thank and acknowledge His Excellency Dr. Al-Rumi and my friend Yusuf Al-Banyan for their great remarks this morning. Now, Your Excellency, I've solved the glass problem by using a bigger font, so I'm hoping that's successful. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, esteemed partners, and colleagues, it's really an honor for me to be here today to share with you some forces and factors that we think will be shaping the industry going forward. As many of you know, my company, LyondellBasell, is one of the largest plastics, chemicals, and refining companies in the world. We have manufacturing facilities and joint ventures in 24 countries and sell our products into more than 100 countries. Last year, we had revenue of about $39 billion. All of this activity delivered by more than 19,000 people, half of whom work outside the United States. Like everyone in our industry, we've been thinking a lot about the so-called megatrends that will drive demand growth over the coming decades. As we discuss at many conferences like this, global population growth is the dominant factor and a growing middle class that are driving demand for our products. With these trends come increased needs for infrastructure, which is inadequate to meet today's needs, let alone those of the future. Increasing shortages of clean water will grow demand for piping that will help to eliminate leakage and waste. Regulation requiring lower emission and improved fuel economy will drive the need for lighter vehicles, and electric vehicles will need to continue extending their useful range. And finally, I would note that the healthcare industry will continue to look on our industry for products that deliver solutions safely and reliably. So in addition to these macro trends, much of our focus has logically been on the growth and opportunity in developing markets, particularly in China and India. As those of you all know, China has developed into the largest petrochemicals market, making up more than 60% of the Asian chemicals market and representing 40% of global chemicals growth over the next decade. Inside China alone, we're seeing the megatrends play out in many different ways. About 170 million citizens in China are predicted to move to cities by 2030. This will require massive infrastructure investment. Consumption by a growing Chinese middle class will likely exacerbate the supply-demand gap, necessitating more polymer production and imports from the Middle East and the US for the foreseeable future. Like everyone, we've been focused on this rate of growth, and in fact, earlier this year, our company announced a memorandum of understanding to form a joint venture with Bora for the construction of a new steam cracker in China. This will produce polyethylene, polypropylene. It's product that will be produced in China and sold in China. So while we've been focused on these trends for quite some time now, I would suggest that there are four emerging forces affecting our industry in ways that will transform the way we think, the way we operate, and even engage in the decades to come. In today's increasingly interconnected world, we need to think in a matrixed way, not just about market opportunities in front of us, but about the broader forces influencing our success, failure, or even ability to compete. In my view, these four forces are globalization and trade, not just the opportunity, but the way trade flows around the world. As we've experienced this year, supply chains and business relationships can be disrupted by events beyond our control. Digitization most likely holds fundamental changes for how our industry operates from a manufacturing perspective, sales perspective, and even the safety of our employees. Digitization will play a tremendous role in the competitiveness of our companies going forward. Environmental sustainability, it's already been spoken about earlier, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our views about that. This, in my view, is really broken into two categories. The first is how we produce our products. That's a subject of discussion. So emissions intensity has received a lot of attention to date. Energy use and water usage will increasingly be part of the mainstream discussion. And of course, plastic waste, the what we produce, will be very important as well. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the issue is not the plastics, but it's the plastic waste and how we dispose of the products that we consume after they're used. This has entered the public's consciousness in a way that is fundamentally driving challenges in our business, in consumer behavior, and in government regulation. Standing here today, it's impossible to predict how all of this will develop over time. But I do know that these forces are powerful, they cannot be ignored, and will somehow shape our industry going forward. Let's first talk about globalization. There's no doubt that globalization has been a net positive for our industry and people around the world. Today, less than 8% of the global population lives in extreme poverty. That's the lowest rate ever recorded in human history. And by 2030, this number is expected to fall even more. As an industry, we've been able to open up new markets and create business models where end users of our products can benefit from plentiful, low-cost feedstock and low-cost manufacturing, both of which have created an untold number of jobs and economic opportunity. So clearly, globalization has been a positive. But our industry in particular has very complex value and supply chains. Because of this, as our world and industry become more interconnected, we have an increasing level of exposure to disruption caused by events well beyond our control. Consider the changes we've experienced just in the past decade. Roughly a decade ago, North America exported about 19% of its polyethylene production to growing markets, while the Gulf region here exported about 44%. At the same time, Northeast Asia met about 88% of their polyethylene demand internally, only importing about 12%. But in a relatively short period of time, we've seen significant change. As of last year, you can see North America and the Middle East polyethylene exports grew significantly, largely to meet massive demand growth in Asia. You will observe from this chart, just last year, Northeast Asia required imports to meet almost half of their demand. Less than a decade from now, we predict that the volume of exports from feedstock-advantaged regions will continue to rise with increasing demand from places like India and China. But at the same time, China is also working diligently to increase their self-sufficiency across a range of base chemicals and has plans to build 40 world-scale polyethylene plants in the next decade. While these predictions are helpful for planning purposes, we also need to consider additional external factors, such as potential increases in protectionism and its implications for global trade, a severe global recession like we saw back in 2008, or even the impact of geopolitical tensions. All of these examples are well beyond our control, but nonetheless, they represent real events and movements we need to consider as we build partnerships and resilience inside our business models. The second emerging force that I described to you was digitization. Consider that 90% of the data ever created by humanity was produced just in the last 2 years. Digitization is having a significant impact on our industry and has the potential to impact value chains, improve productivity, and create new channels to market. This is an area where the transition is happening very rapidly, whether we like it or not. In my view, however, digitization and the fourth industrial revolution presents an opportunity for significant value creation. Today, across our core functions, our companies generate tremendous amounts of data, but most of it is disregarded, or even worse, it's discarded. By capturing and using this data to inform our decision making, we have the opportunity to take this unstructured information and leverage it in a manner that delivers higher throughput, lower energy consumption, more effective maintenance, and even improvements in safety. The World Economic Forum estimates between 2016 and 2025, the cumulative economic value from digitization to range from $310 to $550 billion in the chemistry and advanced materials industry. You can see this across our core functions, from increased efficiency in R&D, plant operations, supply chain, and in the connected workforce. And of course, digital channels are becoming increasingly important, not just for the customer experience, but also in lowering our cost to serve. But like globalization, these benefits do not come without challenges. Deloitte, in a recent report on cyber risks to manufacturing, noted that 35 to 45% of respondents use sensors and/or smart products in their manufacturing process. They also noted that 39% of surveyed companies had experienced a breach in the prior 12 months, and 38% experienced financial loss. For those in our industry, especially those who operate large manufacturing facilities, we need to think about this challenge as much broader than just the loss of intellectual property or having financial impact. We need to consider how the actions of a bad actor who gain control of an operational system could result in significant environmental damage or even potentially loss of life. The third emerging force we must consider is environmental sustainability as it relates to our operations. This, as I described earlier, is about how we produce our products. Earlier this year, the Pew Research Center issued a report indicating that in 13 of 26 surveyed countries, global climate change is seen as a major threat to their nations. And yes, there is significant focus on our environmental footprint, but what is often missed in the discussion is the overall positive impact our products have in terms of sustainability. Take, for example, plastic packaging. As you can see from this chart, the production and transportation of flexible packaging requires less fossil fuel and water, emits fewer greenhouse gases, and can be transported more efficiently than alternative packaging solutions. And while the environmental impact of plastic bags have become a focal point, the BBC recently reported a story noting that a paper bag has to be used 3 times to be as environmentally friendly as a single-use plastic bag, which gets recycled, while a cotton bag has to be used 131 times to be equivalent to a single-use plastic bag. But even so, there is growing attention to being paid to environmental footprint of our manufacturing sites and supply chains. As companies and as collaborators, we've begun to take proactive action in this space. For example, my company, alongside with BASF, Borealis, BP, SABIC, and Total, have announced what we call the Cracker of the Future Consortium. Through this project, we're exploring how to reduce emissions by heating cracking furnaces with electricity rather than fossil fuels. Of course, key to success of this initiative will be ensuring this approach will be both technologically and economically feasible. Another example we are working on is a project where we are undertaking an investment with Covestro at our joint venture in the Netherlands. It's called the Circular Steam Project. This project incorporates innovative technology which converts water-based waste to energy in an existing plant. By doing so, we anticipate an annual CO2 reduction equivalent to taking 31,000 cars off the road and a yearly energy savings equal to that of 90,000 households. Clearly, There's no one answer here, but the drive to reduce water usage and carbon emissions will continue to be a focus and continue to be a force that affects our industry for decades to come. The fourth emerging force is the issue of plastic waste that was mentioned earlier and the transition to a circular economy. While to some extent this trend has seen the most attention in Europe, we know that it'll undoubtedly become global over time. One key indicator of this trend is individuals' interest in this topic and how we're seeing governments react. Between 2013 and 2018, Google searches for marine litter topics increased 204%, and search interest in plastic pollution topics has increased by 608%. Today, governments are becoming increasingly focused on the concept of circularity, and I believe we are at the beginning of what will become a much more complex and compulsory regulatory environment. Of course, this has implications for our business as they exist today. About a year ago, IHS published an important study modeling different scenarios for the growth of recycled material and how it might impact demand for virgin resins. They built the model on a scenario that anticipates government-imposed bans on materials, increased replacement by recycled materials, and the rapid development of infrastructure to increase recycling. As you can see in this graphic, as the scenarios progress from the left to the right, there's increasing content of recycled plastics. On the far right, you see that IHS proposes a very aggressive case which assumes rapid advancements on the policy front as well as recycling technology and infrastructure. In this case, the amount of recycled material could dramatically expand to approximately 27%. IHS estimates if the aggressive case were to become reality and there was a dramatic expansion of recycled material in the marketplace, this could equate to a roughly 50% reduction in the demand growth for virgin material. At LyondellBasell, we've started to think about this trend and how it actually presents a new business opportunity. In 2018, we entered into a mechanical recycling joint venture called Quality Circular Polymers with our partner Suez, who are a waste management company. At QCP, our partner Suez brings segregated polyolefin waste. We wash it, we grind it, we add our additives and our innovation capability to develop new products, mainly for packaging customers. Today, for example, you can find these recycled materials in new Samsonite suitcases or in Unilever packaging, such as the Dove brand or the Axe brand. The circular economy is challenging all of us to think about our business differently, and in this case, really think about how to create new complementary business models and partnerships. In my view, over the next decade and possibly beyond, the formula for success won't just be based on feedstock advantage, high operating rates, and low cost. It's more complex than that. The combination of demographic change coupled with the four forces I've outlined leads me to believe the formula to win in this environment looks like this: feedstock advantage plus innovation plus engagement. We know the dynamics of feedstock advantage, but to win in the future, this advantage must be coupled with innovation. We're beginning to see this already play out in the form of recycling partnerships like the ones I mentioned, or a recent announcement by Saudi Arabia that they're investing $100 billion in India to advance the petrochemicals, infrastructure, and mining sectors. We're also seeing game-changing innovations like chemical recycling and crude-to-chemicals technologies being developed with increasing focus. Finally, given the prominence of the waste issue, we must engage with our employees, communities, governments to ensure that the value of our products are clearly understood and they know that we are committed to a solution, not simply trying to hold off increased regulation. I'm proud of the concrete steps that our industry and many in this room have taken to form the newly named Alliance to End Plastic Waste. We launched the Alliance about a year ago. It was in January, and it's gathering significant momentum. Rather than focusing on deselection or bans of products that are improving the quality of life for billions around the world, we're taking practical steps to identify solutions for effective, scalable, and replicable waste solutions in 4 key areas: infrastructure development to collect and increase recycling of waste, because more than 1/4 of the world's population lack access to basic waste collection. Education and engagement of governments, businesses, and communities. Cleanup of concentrated areas of plastic waste already in the environment, particularly the rivers that carry land-based waste into our oceans. Innovation to advance and scale new technologies that make recycling and recovering plastics easier and create value from all post-use plastics. Recently, the Alliance announced 2 projects, namely an effort to clean up the Ganges River in India and Project Stop in Indonesia, which is an effort to stop leakage of plastic waste from reaching the world's oceans. LyondellBasell has dedicated significant focus and resources to the Alliance, not as a PR move, but because we believe it is the most logical, effective way to advance solutions across the value chain, engaging communities who need the most help. I would like to conclude today my comments by saying that I'm more optimistic about our industry than perhaps I've ever been. This optimism is also balanced with a strong dose of pragmatism and awareness that there are forces that will in part shape our future. As with any journey that involves change, there are a lot of questions and some degrees of uncertainty, and I'm certain that I don't have all the answers. But I believe if we do the right things, make sound decisions, and collaborate on practical, market-based solutions, we can make this challenge a win-win-win for our industry, the environment, and the consumers around the world. Thank you very much for your time today. It was an honor to be able to share these thoughts.